Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Raceday review. My name is Joe. You can find me on Facebook. Not Facebook, Jesus. You can find me on FanDuel and DraftKings at JoeJets19. Also on Twitter at JoeJets19. And Twitch is twitch.com/JoeJets19. We'll be going over the Bank of America Roval 400 today. It wrapped up yesterday afternoon in the middle of the crazy NFL slate, but it added some dramatics to themselves. A lot of the dramatics were due to the playoffs and not really the race itself. There was some interesting things that went on with the race, and we'll go through with that. Um, I started the day before even the race talking to one of the another content provider for NASCAR about the Roval and how I really didn't like this race. And if you notice, the DraftKings contest did not fill, and that's really a big concern going forward because we don't want to make that want the contest to be made smaller because that means there's much less money to win. I was thinking people were really going to sit on their hands with this slate, especially with the fact that the Roval has only been run once and they added a new chicane in the backstretch. Well, not added it, but updated it a little bit. And with such a crazy NFL slate going on, that people would just save their money for next week or the next couple of weeks. And um, that's hopefully what it did. Hopefully um, they didn't make the slate smaller for next week for this contest that they already put up. But the race ended up being pretty highly rated. There's some polls that go out on Twitter after the race to ask people how they liked it, and a lot of people really did. From a DFS perspective, it wasn't exactly the best race in the whole wide world, but for an actual watching perspective, it was pretty fun. So we'll start as we always do, breaking down the perfect lineup this week. Um, this week's perfect lineup. Sorry, this was a look ahead to Dover. Had Michael McDowell, who did not practice on Friday, so some ownership was off of him from that. He had a stomach flu, and Austin Cindric actually practiced his car, so he was in question to see if he was even going to race. But Saturday he practiced, and obviously he was able to make it through. He was on my radar this week. I really did. I enjoyed him because one, I was hoping that the ownership would be down due to the fact that he was sick on Friday and wasn't able to qualify. Also, I wasn't sure if people would think that there was some sort of issue with the rules of driver changes, um, but that was not the case. So he started 22nd as he was supposed to be. Um, he ran pretty well. He didn't really do anything crazy. We're gonna go through his loop data to see what he actually did. He actually ran about in the top 15 for most of the race. He ended up finishing 12th. No fastest laps, no laps led. I had him in a range of, let's see how he practiced. So he finished 18th here last time. He didn't pick up a spot or lose any spots. Um, and he was a top 20 finisher in the last two. So he had an average finish of 20.5 in the last two road courses this year. So he had some upside, and that's what I liked him for. Um, Between Di Benedetto being fairly popular and more expensive, Busher was more expensive and also fairly popular. I had him. His single lap average was 13th best. His weighted single lap average was 13th best. His weighted 10 lap average was 19th best. So my model put him at about a 16th play finish, which was pretty nice. And he had a ceiling of 12th and actually a floor of 22nd. So I didn't think he was going to move any spots, and he pretty much hit his ceiling as far as I had projected. Um, so overall, the way that shook out, DraftKings was very nice to us, and that there weren't any $12,000 drivers, only weren't any $11,000 drivers. They had a couple of high $10,000 guys, and probably about all the worthwhile drivers were between 8,500 and like 10,500. So it was hard to make a. It was you want. We were looking for balanced teams. You probably wanted to have one scrub under $5,000. We'll get to that in a second. Under $6,000, and McDowell fit right in there. I thought we'd probably have to go lower until about 5,500, roughly in that area. But McDowell actually was the cheapest driver in the perfect lineup, and there was some room to spare. You could have gotten someone a little bit more expensive, but no one else really panned out besides Ty Dillon, who was exactly $600 more than him. So there's no one in between there that scored any higher than McDowell. So I thought we were going to have probably one guy a little cheaper than McDowell and another one in the $6,000 range. We were able to get two guys in the $6,000 range, which was good, but a little bit different than what I was aiming for. My big fade of the week I thought was going to be William Byron. There's no way in hell he was going to be able to sustain enough points to make him relevant. He was starting on the pole. He led 23 laps, and he probably could have led more. He could have led the entire first stage, which was 25 laps if there wasn't a caution. He raced much better than I expected. I didn't think he was going to be able to lead that many laps and stay up there because he finished 17th. He finished 34th here last race. He has an average finish of 20th at races, at road course races, but also an average place differential of minus 18, which means he normally qualifies very well and then just falls back. His single lap times were in the top three. His 10 lap average was in the top three. So and we know that usually for these cars and with this package this year that you're going to want the clean air, but just didn't think over 109 laps he was going to be able to hold on to enough place differential, enough places to that all of his lap lead and fastest lap points wouldn't be wiped away with negative points for place differential. He held on to a top six. Good for him. You know, you take one on the chin every now and then, and I've been pretty much fading him all year because he's been qualifying very well and finishing decently, but not well enough to pay off his salary, and now his salary is really starting to creep up there. 8,600 is a lot to pay for William Byron, but he paid it off, and he was able to make it, so good for him. You gotta tip your hat to him, and that's that. Live to fight another day. Kevin Harvick was the stud of the perfect lineup. Everyone wanted to play Denny Hamlin. Me included. I thought Denny Hamlin was lock and load the driver to play this week, with no real guaranteed dominators, and not really knowing how the dominators were going to shake out at all, not knowing where they're going to come from. Last year's race really wasn't that much of a help trying to help us spot those out. So Hamlin was. Give me 1 second. 10,400. Kevin Harvick was 10,200. They started way differently. Hamlin started 28th. Harvick started 6th. The last race here, Harvick finished better than him, picked up more spots, but overall, the last two road races, Hamlin, just so you can follow along, Hamlin's the top row here. Hamlin finished better, had better place differential, and ran at a higher average running position than Kevin Harvick, who finished 6.5 average instead of 4th. Picked up more spots, but also ran at a higher. So I really liked Hamlin's chances here to get on the perfect lineup. I mentioned last week, you got to play the chalk. I love playing chalk. I love eating chalk. And in NASCAR, that's really what I want to do. I want to make sure that shore up your floor and make sure that you're playing the chalk. And that's really what I absolutely love to do in NASCAR. Every now and then it doesn't work. This year, it's been working out handsomely for all of us. So that's what I've really been hammering home with. But today it didn't work. And unfortunately, it didn't. What made Harvick a good play? I mean, his single lap times weren't that great. His 10 lap average wasn't that great. It's just the drivers in front of him didn't put up too much of a fight, and he was able to get up there. The pit strategy got him pretty good because he was able to pick up. He was able to pick up the lead after the first two cautions because there was a caution right before the stage break, and then they ended up that caution lasted into the stage break. So he was able to get up front for that. He was able to take over Larson. I think Larson ended up actually taking the lead there, but Harvick got past him pretty quickly. And then he led pretty much for a good portion until there was some bullshit. There were a couple of bullshit cautions, and that's really what a lot of that was really a story of the race. There are a lot of cautions out there that um, there are a lot of there are a lot of cautions out there that really hampered the race because sometimes they were cautions for things that made sense. Sometimes they didn't throw cautions that things that made sense, and really especially towards the end of the race where there's a caution every 6 seconds. There was actually 10 cautions this race, and that means 8 of them were from things that weren't the stage breaks, and it was nuts towards the end of the race. A lot of things ended up happening. At one point, Chase Elliott, who we'll talk about soon, just decided to drive into a wall after a stage caution. On the restart, everyone went left and he went right, and the wall was there to catch him. But we'll get there in a second. Anyway, so Harvick, he had a good history. He had one of the better cars than the drivers starting in front of him, but he was really helped with the cautions. And sorry, I'm just clicking around to see if there's anything else I could help you with that. Um, you had to have some of them. There was enough space to run around, so I ended up even with my core builds, I had some Keselowski because he was 10,000, and he was actually the driver that was in the perfect lineup and the a lot of the winning lineups. They had Harvick, Keselowski, McDonald. So instead of they had a little bit of a different instead of Boyer, they had a little bit of a different build. I told you Di Benedetto was going to be a very popular driver, and even though he wasn't in the perfect lineup, he ended up being in the winning lineup. And with the fade on Byron, because no one really, he was very low owned. Even following the fade on Byron, you still could have tied for the first gear because that lineup didn't have Byron in it to begin with. Um, so we're going to move on to Ty Dillon. Ty Dillon starting 29th, right in front of his brother, who was starting 30th. Austin Dillon was getting a lot of flack this week. Now that there were some comments about him being cheated with a golden spoon, and well, Ty decided to stick up for him, I guess, by landing himself in the perfect lineup. Austin really not having that great of a year. Ty Dillon was on my radar this week, basically because of the price, and I told you we're going to need a couple of drivers that were under 7,000. I figured one that was going to be in the 55,000 to 5,500 range, and another one 5,500 to 6,000, 6,500, somewhere around there. Ty Dillon is actually not terrible at road courses, and he's been on a heater. I mentioned him a couple of maybe last episode where he had a top 20 in 5 consecutive races. I thought he was going to continue that, and he decided to finish like 30th, and that really screwed me up. This time I wasn't nearly as high on him, but he was on my radar, and he continues with his top 20 streak, which was very nice of him. So last race he finished 22nd. Picked up about 4 spots this year. He's not really been doing that great because he finished 28.5, average finish of 28.5 with a couple of place differentials. He ran a little better than that. His practice speeds were really what put me on to him. He had a weighted average of 25th, but he had some good runs in there. starting 29th, even with a 25th practice speed, 25th single lap average and 24th 10 lap average. That's still 5 places up. All I needed him to pick up was another about 5 places, and for him to pretty much be where I needed him to be, and he exceeded that. Um, Again, another guy who hit his ceiling. I had him as a top finish of 15, low finish of 27. So he really, worst comes to worst, I thought he would be able to at least pick up 2 spots. Obviously, if he drives into a wall and his days ended, that really would have screwed me. But that my models don't really take into account that because that's just impossible to guarantee. Oh, one thing is I did have Kevin Harvick as a ceiling of first, so that makes so even though he did not win, I did see that he had some upside. He finished third, so right around where I thought he was. He did not hit his ceiling, but that's all right. That they can't always. So Chase Elliott won here last year. He did not win here last year. He won the last 2 Watkins Glen races, which is one of the other road courses on tour, on the circuit, really. So he is a very good road racer. Um, he was up front most of the time, except when the third stage, and the beginning of the third stage, when the field decided to make a left and he made a right, plowing directly into the tire barrier, making a caution. And I thought my day was done. I thought his day was done. Um, Lucky for us, it wasn't. He rebounded pretty well. He really could have dominated. He could have led most of the second stage and really been out there for a while, but he just had to fight back. He did pretty well. He did what he had to do, and he got up front when it counted. He finished sixth here last year, qualified well and fell back. He had an average finish of 19th, which is very misleading considering that he won in Watkins Glen. He ended up having a problem in Sonoma, and he was out pretty quickly, so that's how he ends up getting to the 19th. But overall, that's why you have to dig a little deeper into the numbers, and that's why in my article I did mention that he was a winner. You can't always look at the similar finish positions or things like that. You have to actually see what was going on there, which is very important. There are only 40 guys in the field, so where there are other sports in baseball, you have a 300 player pool. In football, you have a 400 player pool. Every week, you don't got that many guys to look into, so you can really get into the nuts and bolts of something, see where they just started, where they finished, where they ran, what really happened. Because as you can see, the average run of his average run at similar tracks was 8th, but somehow his average finish was 19th. So they can be misleading. He had the second best weighted single lap time, and then the 4th best 10 lap. I had him as a ceiling of second. Unfortunately, he started first. He finished first. I'd say unfortunately because I really would have liked to have been able to call that one. He was starting 19th, and he was a great driver to look up on. And the reason I say that is we're going to put this by salary, DraftKings salary. And I told you that Hamlin was the chalk of the chalk for good reason. But he was right smack dab into some other chalk. Truex is a great road racer, so he was the most expensive guy. Kyle Busch, he was up front. No, he was not. He had some place differential that he had built in and can always get up front when he needs to. He decided to park his car after after the last caution, which got people very pissed off. But he said that he had some car issues, so it is what it is. People just love to hate on Kyle Busch. I love when he makes me money, so I don't see the reason why people would be so upset about it. But people love hating Kyle Busch. Denny Hamlin was the super chalk. Harvick ends up getting in the perfect lineup and the winning lineups. Keselowski ends up getting in the winning lineups. He went a little bit under the radar. Logano flailed out pretty terribly. So Larson, Blaney, Kurt Busch, Eric Jones is a very interesting range. Chase Elliott, Larson, yeah. Larson, Blaney, Kurt Busch, Eric Jones is a fun range, and it's because Elliott was starting 19th, Larson was starting up front, so you have a um, someone with place differential who could possibly win. In Elliott, you had Larson, someone up front who could possibly lead laps and hold on to a top five because his practice times were also pretty good. He had the fourth best single and the first back 10 lap average, so he was popular and he should be popular because he had a very good chance of leading some laps. And if he hung on to a top five, that would have been great, but he ran into some trouble. Blaney was a sneaky play. He started ninth. I liked him as a possible. He won here last year, and because of the accident between Truex and Jimmy Johnson, I thought that he had a chance of doing something very similar. He had an average finish of fourth in the last two races here with a win. His car wasn't the best, but the way that he actually had the best weighted single lap time, but he didn't have the best 5 lap average. So there were faster cars out there. Larson's car was faster, and he was starting further forward. So as for a guy that you wanted to lead laps, Larson made a great play, but Blaney really did have had a chance of getting there. And then, so these guys, you need to have some ownership on. So Larson was starting further back than these guys, but he was starting further forward than Kurt Busch. And Kurt Busch was all the chalk. He's a great road racer. He has a reputation of being a great road racer. This year, not as much, but overall in his career, an awesome road racer. He needed to do well to move on in the playoffs, so he had that narrative going. He was $600 less than Elliott, but he was starting 4 places behind. As far as his car went, he didn't have as good of a car by any stretch of the imagination, but it's one of those things where skill trumps a lot of the car issues when it comes to road courses. So he was a bet on skill, a bet on the long-term history, and I loved Kurt Busch this week. Didn't work out for me. Didn't work out for him. He's out of the playoffs now. We'll talk about that in a little bit. He ended up finishing 20th, so he picked up some spots, but starting 23rd, that wasn't really what you wanted to do. Eric Jones, a boom and bust play. I had him losing spots, so I didn't write him up. I'm tired of getting burned by Eric Jones. I wrote one of my articles saying, I will not write up Eric Jones. I will not write up Eric Jones. I will not write up Eric Jones, and I ended up writing up Eric Jones. He ended up winning. He ended up being in the perfect lineup that week, so that made me happy. Hopefully some of our subscribers enjoyed that too. But overall, he, without a doubt, he screwed up so bad that he was in a win or be done situation, and he decided to be done real quick. I think he only ran about 23 laps. So that was really nice of Eric Jones. He blew up real quick. So this is a very interesting range because you had a couple of options. You had a dominator, a sneaky dominator in Larson. You had a sneaky race winner in Blaney. Then you had the chalk, who would be Kurt Busch, and the pivot off of Kurt Busch, a logical pivot off of Kurt Busch, would be Chase Elliott. He was more expensive and finished a little bit further forward, but he had a great car, and he's a good road racer. So I ended up writing about both of them because I like both of them, and I could fit both of them in the lineup if you don't go. It was tough to get people. I started a lot of lineups with Hamlin, Elliott, and Busch because, well, we'll talk about where I was in the lineup building part of the. Let's just go over the last driver. Clint Bowyer, another guy who was racing for his life. He really didn't do much. He picked up one spot. He led 2 laps, but that was enough to pay off his salary. With all the drivers finishing all the drivers a little more expensive than him, running into trouble, he didn't have to do what he really needed anything more to do. He survived and he moved on. So in tournaments, I was looking this week. I was looking for gonna target my builds a little differently. In tournaments, I wanted 3 drivers starting in the top 10 because I wanted to soak up all the laps led. Last year, the 2 drivers that led the most laps ended up having a crash, and that really screwed them out of winning everything, but I was hoping that wasn't going to happen today. Actually, Chase Elliott did have a crash, but he recovered, so he almost made history repeat itself. But I thought that if I could, with 109 laps, um, another interesting stat, the top 8 finishers in the last race started in the top 9. So I thought that the top 10, if you um, chose 3 drivers starting in the top 10 that had a chance to lead laps, they also had a chance of staying safe the entire race, which was very important because if you end up pulling a Kyle Busch and he got up to the top 10 and decided to crash out and not finish the race. He went negative. If you did that from the top 10, you would be even more screwed. So I thought the top 10 had a lot more safety this race than most races. So in GPPs where you want to play a little more risky, I was willing to take the gamble on choosing three drivers in the top 10 that I thought could lead laps, and actually 3 drivers from the top 10 did end up making it in there. Only 2 of them led laps, but one of them was the guy I decided to pull a full fade on. So the theory was there. The drivers I decided to choose, not so much. So that hurt a little bit. In cash, I was going to go a little more safe. I talked about how drivers starting in the top 10 were much more safe than usual, and I was only going to choose 2 drivers in the top 10. One that I thought that could lead laps, one that I thought could win. And since all of the chalk in the back, Hamlin, Kurt Busch, I loved Ryan Newman. We'll get there in a second when I talk about some of my other drivers that I was really high on. And then depending on how the depending on how many drivers, if it was a GPP or a cash game, we would then fill it out with drivers I thought that could pick up at least 5 or 6 lineups. 5 or 6, focusing is spelled wrong, and that's really embarrassing. Um, 5 or 6 spots at least, but they had to stop and finish in the top 15. I mentioned a couple of races ago about how place differential was cool, but finishing position was really the biggest thing I was looking for, and that came to fruition. The perfect example would be Ty Dillon and Parker Kligerman. I was all over Parker Kligerman this race. I have a Parker Kligerman problem. He ended up picking up 14 spots and finishing 26th, but he only put up about 30 something points, where Michael McDowell only picked up 10 spots, and he outscored him, as well as Ty Dillon, who also picked up 14 spots. So he was outscored by McDowell and Dillon, not meaning that Kligerman wasn't a bad play. For GPPs, he probably wasn't the best. In cash games, he was an awesome play because he couldn't lose you points, and that's why I love him. I loved him this race. He's also has a pretty good history at road courses. He was terrible in practice, absolutely pitiful in practice. Couldn't be any worse in practice. But as far as overall, he finished 28th here last year, which was picking up 12 spots. I was perfectly fine in cash for a 10 to 12 spot pickup. Give me the floor, and we'll look for ceiling other places. In cash, you don't really want to care so much about a ceiling, so I always want to. I just wanted the floor that he provided. Newman. Let me see some of the other guys that really popped for me. Stenhouse loves the wreck. Not a big fan. Bubba Wallace decided to throw stuff in Alex Bowman's face. That was entertaining. Sidebar on that, I don't know why people care. There's Twitter blew up with all the other times that people decided to start fights and do things like that, and after a race, and Bubba Wallace is just joining the tradition. That's one of the reasons why people love NASCAR. If you don't agree with me, you can throw some water in my face too. I don't know what to tell you. David Reagan's always somewhere in there. I liked Tift for a little bit just because of where he was starting. When it came down to here, I really only played Kligerman, Chastain, Castle, Reagan, Tift. Not really LaJoy. McDowell I had some of. Ty Dillon I liked. I liked Di Benedetto over Buscher. He was starting further back, but actually had a better but actually had a better car, had a better history. And for some reason, I read during the week that, well, not during the week, but during the season, that Di Benedetto loves these quirky ass tracks. That's where he thinks he can. That's where his team puts a lot of money in him because he knows he's not going to win a 1.5 mile oval, but he will win some of these crazier things. And he's had a great season with them, and he finished 11th. I actually had a ceiling as second. That just means one of my models sucked, but it's all right. He finished right in between that and didn't make it in the perfect lineup. Um, Starting 18th, he didn't make up enough points, but he did end up in the winning lineup of the $4 and the $11, so that's great. Newman killed me. I just wanted to touch on that before I really, with Boyer being $100 more, Byron being $200 more, Johnson finishing. So the Byron, Boyer, and Johnson were all in the same price range and started in the top five. And sitting right in the middle of there, starting 24th, was my man Ryan Newman, who practiced terribly, but I don't choose him for his practice times. I choose him for his safety. Decided to really run in the top 20. He was fighting for a playoff spot towards the end and would have had it if he just finished the race clean and misses the chicane and ended up getting a 30-second penalty because he never stopped, so he didn't do his stop and go penalty. He just added 30 seconds onto his time.